Welcome to VentureStep podcast, where we discuss entrepreneurship, industry trends, and the occasional book review. Have you ever dreamt of just picking up your life and moving somewhere completely new? I'm sure we all have. And I'm not moving, but I'm temporarily staying in Seoul in South Korea. So I am staying in Tokyo, and then Seoul in South Korea. And so there is some changes that you need, and I figured this would be a cool episode to talk about, and just to discuss like the different culture that I've had since settling in. I've only been here for a couple days now, 3 days or something, but I've been out and about the whole time. So definitely don't know everything, but there's some things I have observed that might be useful to share. And I also was going to talk about, okay, so now that you're here in a foreign country, like what are some things that you should probably put together to make things a bit easier for yourself? And I've done this twice now. So the first time I lived in Mexico City, Mexico for 1 month in January. And so this is my second time. So I learned some lessons from last time and some to-dos and don'ts. Mexico City is a little bit, I would say, not dangerous, but I think you have to be more cautious on what you're doing. But I wouldn't subscribe to the idea that Mexico City is like inherently dangerous as long as you're not doing stupid stuff. I mean, Japan can be dangerous. New York City can be dangerous. Anywhere can be dangerous if you're not, if you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing, especially in a place that you don't know the language, you're not familiar with the laws. So you really want to stay within a box, So, okay. That being said, that's what I'm going to talk about today. And of course, before we dive in, I'm your host, Dalton Anderson. I've got a bit of a mix of background in programming, data science, and insurance. Offline, you can find me running, building my side business, or lost in a good book. You can listen to the podcast in both video and audio format, if that's your thing, on YouTube. If audio is more your thing, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or of course, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Okay, so I haven't been here that long, obviously. So I got here on Thursday last week, and today is Tuesday, my time. For you, if you're listening to this in the US, it'd be Monday at night, almost late. And so I am in a bit of a rush to get this episode out because I was supposed to do it yesterday, but I was jet lagged and my body was like broken from pickup soccer. I did some pickup soccer and pickup volleyball all in the same day. And I did that because I signed up for them and they were waitlisted. So I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be able to play soccer because I actually play soccer. And so I signed up for soccer and I was waitlisted and I was like, oh, like I was like third on the wait list. So I was like, oh, like I'm just going to apply to something else and I'll do that instead. Like no big deal. And then it winded up happening that morning of, I was told that I was playing soccer too. And you can't really cancel the day of the event because it is not cool because the guy or like the assigner or the host or however you want to phrase it, that person assigns the teams to make sure they're all balanced. So they have a genuine effort of, okay, like what's your skill level here? You're new. I want to make sure the teams are balanced. You explain it, and then they balance out the team. So like hand select each person for each team with different characteristics to make sure that the games are competitive. And so if you just leave the day of an event a couple hours before, it's definitely frowned upon and not cool. So I didn't want to leave that first impression. So I wound up playing like 4 hours, 4 hours or 4.5 hours of volleyball, taking an hour train ride, and then playing futsal, or not futsal, indoor soccer on top of this mall that's like 7 stories overlooking the city. Super beautiful. You could see Mount Fuji, you could see the city. Oh, incredible. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And I got to meet all these random people. It was an amazing experience. And I'll go into more detail about that later. But the main point of this conversation right now, this train of thought, was my body was absolutely wrecked. And then I was jet lagged. So I was just almost like a vegetable yesterday. And I didn't really leave my bed until later later that night to get dinner, and my dinner became my lunch and dinner. So I just ate an incredible amount and went from there, and then went to bed. So okay, so when I initially traveled here, it's a 16 and a half hour flight from where I live in the US. I live in Florida. So that's pretty far, and I don't think there's any way around it. The flight is devastating. Like, I've never been on, I think the longest flight I've ever been on is maybe 5 hours, 5.5 hours or something like that. And so my headphones are broken. I had a book to read that I could read, but there's only so much reading and sleeping I can accomplish in 16 hours. And then you get here, and there is like, you get, basically you're in like the future, because you're 13 hours ahead, and then you were traveling for 16 and a half hours. So you're just like in a different world, basically. You leave it in the morning the day before, and then you get there 2 days later in the afternoon, right? I left Thursday. I got to Japan Friday like 2 p.m., 3 p.m. And then it took me an hour to get to my place. But I mean, just the travel trek was just like crazy insane. The amount of waiting you have to do in your seat. I want to get a massage here, because the first couple of days was sore. I wasn't even sore from exercising. I was just sore from sitting. So that flight was crazy. Then you get there, and where I'm living right now, I'm living in a place called Shinjuku. So Shinjuku is like a hip district with younger people, bars, clubs, things like that. And then they also have like a red light district, which I don't really, I'm not going to go to. But the idea behind being in Shinjuku was, okay, like, since they have a lot of nighttime activities, I'll be able to do stuff at night all the time, where they'll have a lot of things open, and restaurants will be open. Like, a lot of them might be 24/7 or pretty much all night, because I have 1 week off, and then I'm 1 week on. So I'm off this week, and then next week I am going to be working Eastern time. So I'll be working at night. And so when I need to do stuff, I'll need to do it in like the middle of the night. If I need to go out and get lunch or do whatever, work out, it's going to be in the middle of the night. So that was my thought process. I don't know how useful it's going to be. Who knows? I haven't had to really utilize those time frames yet. So I haven't stayed up that late either. I think the latest I've stayed up is 11, going out and about. So not much traveling there, but I did have insane trouble defining my place. Like, I messaged my host like the day of. It's like, hey, I'm traveling. I'll be there like the next day at this time. She's like, okay, cool. And then I land. I'm like, hey, I just touched down. I'm going to be making my commute over to the place. Like, please be available if I have any issues. She's like, yeah, of course. And then I get there an hour and a half later, and I'm messaging her like, hey, I can't find the place. The address isn't working. And then she doesn't message me. And then I keep searching for like another 40 minutes, and I message her again. And I'm like, hey, like, I really need help here. Like, I'm stuck. I don't know where to go. And then I kept searching. And then after another like 30 minutes, I was like, hey, I need something to go off here. I've got nothing, and I need help. Like, I seriously need help. Like, I can't find the place that I paid for. And she didn't respond. So I was in between just booking another place for the night and figuring it out in the morning, because I was traveling with 3 suitcases, because I'm here for a month. So I have all my work stuff, I have all my personal stuff, my podcast equipment. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I basically moved here with like minimal amount of clothes, but brought all of my work stuff and all of my podcast stuff with me. And so the bags are pretty heavy. And so I'm going up and down the hills and stairs, like these train stations. don't have they don't have escalators for the most part for going up. They have escalators going down. The bigger stations, they have escalators going up and down, but the smaller stations, not so much. So I had to do everything like holding 2 suitcases, go up the flights of stairs, and it's pretty steep. It might be like 80 stairs. It's almost like a stadium. And then I have to go back down, get my other suitcase, bring it all the way up. And yeah, I had to do that all the time. And then once you get there to the place that you're going to, I couldn't find it. And I was searching about, and I had to just roll them all around and go up the hills and down the hills and go through alleyways and stuff. And you got to think about it, like the streets in the train station are packed. Like it's not like, I don't know if there's a good way to picture it, but you got to think about it. Like when I was taking the train with these suitcases, it's like shoulder to shoulder deep in the train. So I'm trying to like push all these people to get my stuff in because there's nowhere to put your suitcase. There's a place to put your bag, but it doesn't fit suitcases. And so if I put my suitcase up there, it would fall. The commuter trains that come in from the airport, they have a spot for your suitcases, but like the normal passenger trains, they don't have spots for your suitcase. So I'm packed into this transportation device, the train, and I'm shoulder to shoulder with all these people, and I'm trying to figure out like where to go. I don't have an eSIM yet, so my internet is like really slow. And so I'm struggling to even like pull up Google Maps or like to look at things on the map. My host isn't responding. And I get off the train, I find the spot that I think I'm supposed to go to, and it's nowhere to be found. And then that's when I started messaging my host. After that, I searched for like 2.5 hours, and then I kept messaging my host like, hey, like I can't find the place. And then at a certain point I was like, oh, I might have gotten scammed here. Like this could be a fatal event here. You know, you go across the world and it's almost 20 hours away from where you live, and the place that you paid for isn't available because it doesn't exist or something like that. I was like, oh, I guess they got me, you know, I'll figure it out. But it wasn't the case. Well, my host never responded. So the way that I narrowed it down was I knew that there was a 7-Eleven near the place because it had a photo of a 7-Eleven nearby. And so I knew that there's a 7-Eleven, and that's pretty much it. So there's a lot of 7-Elevens in Japan. Like there's literally like a 7-Eleven like on every block. It's like family, I think it's called Family Store or 7-Eleven, or like the two main spots. So what I did was I searched for a 7-Eleven on the street that I'm on, which is Chrome 2. And then I just went from 7-Eleven to 7-Eleven, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of 7-Elevens here, and Chrome 2 is a massive road. So I was having troubles there. And then I was looking through the listing and the message she sent me, and there's like this Google link, and this Google link had like a small screenshot or like photo of the building. I could only see maybe 25% of the building I was living in or I'm going to live in. And then I could see like maybe 35% of like 3 other buildings that are nearby. And it looked like it was on an alleyway. So I narrowed that down. And so I found the places that I needed to go to on the Google Maps. I was like, okay, like this might be it. This might be it. And I was like looking at the angle of the photos, like see like the different buildings. And there's only one photo, but I was talking about the angle of the photos on the listing. And eventually I found the building that I'm staying in, but it took me forever, and I was worried I got scammed. So that was my first impression of Japan. And it was very difficult because I didn't have good internet access or Wi-Fi puck. So that was my initial impression. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is brutal. I finally get here. It's pretty cool. It's small, obviously. It's Japan, Tokyo. Like it's going to be packed. It's got good wall AC. You can't see, but it's right there. It's got some good lighting. It's got a small shower and toilet. But then I check into my place. It's late. It took me, because an hour train ride or an hour and a half train ride from the airport to where I'm at. And then it took me another like 3 hours to get my place. So I got here like late, like maybe 8, 9. So I wanted to stay in, but I was like, it's my first night. I have to make an appearance. And so I went and got some ramen at this place. And this is like the first thing that I noticed was the guy was like telling me in Japanese. I don't know Japanese, so I don't really know what's going on. But basically he's like, dude, like you can't sit here. And I didn't understand. And then so I just observed like the other people coming in, and so that a lot of these ramen shops, they have these vending machines, and so you put in your money, and a lot of them are cash only, and so you have to get your yen. So you get your Japanese yen, and you just put in your money, and you select what you want, and it pops out a ticket, and you provide that ticket to like the assistant, and the assistant will ask you some questions like, okay, like how do you want your noodles? Like, do you want them normal, soft, hard, or do you want your noodles to be like rich, like normal, or something else? Like there's a whole bunch of like, I think there's typically like 3 questions. Sometimes they just ask you nothing, and then sometimes they'll ask you like how you want your noodles. Do you want them cold, hot, normal, whatever? Thickness of your noodles. How do you want them to be flavored? All sorts of things. Then once you answer that stuff to the assistant hands the ticket over to the cook, and then the cook cooks it, obviously. But they won't let you sit down until you go to the vending machine. I didn't know that, so that was like a shock. I was like, okay, that's actually pretty sick. So I look through everything on the vending machine, put in my money, pops out this ticket, and then I'm good to go. And they'll basically tell you where to sit by once you get your ticket out. Like they'll look at you, like they'll stare at you until you get your ticket. A lot of places, because they know you're about to order, and so they want to give you like good service. And also I think I just take forever, and they want to make sure I don't mess up because I'm obviously not Japanese, and so I could be affecting their business because like, okay, people might see that there's people at the vending machine because there's typically only one. I've only seen one. I haven't been anywhere where it has multiple vending machines. Or actually I have. I've been to one where it has 2, but I might be holding them up because people might see that it's busy and they'll just go to a different shop because there's plenty of ramen. So maybe that might be it. But I think the main thing is I just want to make sure I don't mess up and cause issues for myself or them. So you order, you get your food, then you leave. That was pretty cool. I love the ramen. The ramen was insanely good. A bit salty. I don't know how we would consume that consistently. The food, I would say, is insanely good. I think out of many places that you go to that are hyped up from others, like Italy, Japan, wherever, Tokyo, I think lives up to the hype with being super clean. For the amount of people that live here, I think it's close to 40 million people live in Tokyo. The amount of people that live here, the city is so clean, and they don't have any issues really with trash and things, the streets smelling. They have a whole bunch of alleyways that are, I guess, streets, but not really streets. Like if you have a small car, you can drive on this alleyway. But if your car is like a normal size car that you would see like in the US or something like that, because they have normal size cars here as well. If it's not a smaller car, then you can't, it's too narrow for a normal car to drive on. And you can't drive very fast. You can only drive like 20 miles an hour. But basically they're like walking, running, and biking trails, and a lot of utility bikes use those. So utility bike is like a food delivery service where they'll put the food on the bike and then they'll drive about like on their scooter. But I'm saying this because there's this whole network of alleyways in Japan, Tokyo, and it's super clean, very clean, and there's no really like litter. Like people don't litter here. Like from what I've observed, like there's nothing like that. And trash is a big deal here. Like the culture of like taking care of your trash and making sure that you don't throw your trash away in like places you're not supposed to. Like when I was playing soccer, I got a meal before and I was eating it, and I was like, hey, like where do I put this? Because like there's no trash cans. And he's like, you really can't throw this out here. Like it's gonna smell, and there's not really a place for you at the mall to throw it out. Like you have to either throw it out at your house, or like you have to go XYZ, and they'll accept it. And like trash is like a big deal. Like they take it really serious. And if I were to throw it out like somewhere where I wasn't supposed to, they would not necessarily contact me, but they would definitely contact the guy, the host, and he would get in trouble and fined and potentially lose his privileges of being able to rent out that space. So I didn't want that, and he didn't want that, obviously. So he kind of explained to me like why it's such a big deal. The public transportation in Tokyo is insane. And maybe if you're from New York or like some bigger city, you're like, oh, well, it's got to have great transportation and it's got to be efficient. I don't have that experience. Like my life experience, I've never really like lived in a big city, and the best motor of like I guess the best train transportation I've had is a place back down south in southern Florida called the Tri-Rail system. And it's a train transportation partnership between 3 different counties. And then these counties have a train line that runs in parallel. So there isn't like multiple cross sections of train lines. There's not like a blue, a red, a purple, a pink line. Like there's just one line, and it goes up and it goes down, and that's it. And so it's very simple, and it goes from West Palm Beach to Miami, and it takes like an hour and a half or something to get from West Palm Beach to Miami, something like that. And it costs like nothing to go. It's like $9. And so that's what I used all the time when I didn't have a car. So I would have my bike and my train. And so I would take the train with my bike, store my bike somewhere, get off the train, bike somewhere, and either like do some soccer refereeing or something like that in college. That's really what I did. But that's my experience with trains. So I'm not coming from New York City or anything like that. So I have read that the train system in Tokyo is world class. And from my experience of spending in these last, couple days, I've probably spent 1, 2, 3, probably like 6 hours on the train. I've been doing a lot of train riding. So I've been going like different places and doing different things on the train and trying to utilize the train as much as possible. Insanely good train, like or I guess transportation via train. It is always on time. I've never had it delayed. The signage and like what to do is pretty straightforward, and I'm not very experienced with these things. So if I can do it, I'm sure other people that with more experience can do it just fine. It's definitely nowhere near as confusing as Mexico City. The Mexicans in Mexico City didn't even understand like the bus system and the train system. They're like, brother, I don't know. Like it's hard for me. I can't really explain it to you. Because there wasn't a lot of documentation of like what things were, where they were, how things are going, which bus lines are going on what routes. And there was a general consensus that the buses were better. They had an inter circuit and an outer circuit bus route that had a lot of lines, but the lines in between were very blurred. So you didn't really know, other than the inner circuit and the outer circuit, you didn't know. So that's where the Mexicans would take the train, or not the train, the bus. They would take like a bike sharing service. Like I think in Mexico City was City Bike as well. And so it's City Bike, which is similar to New York City. So I think New York City has a partnership with City Bike. You take the City Bike, you bike to your place, the train, you have to bike it to a drop-off spot, bike to that drop-off spot, and then from there, go and take the bus. And the inner circuit and the outer circuit, they connect at certain points, but they're mostly separate, and they're just circuits that run constantly. Okay, so I say that because Tokyo's train system is super easy to navigate, very quick, efficient, very clean. It's packed, but people are respectful. Like no one is playing music without headphones. If you're playing headphones and the music's leaking, you're supposed to turn it down. People aren't going on there like being absurd and obnoxious. Like everyone keeps to themselves, even though it's packed. And It seems like everyone is very respectful and kind. Like when I was going out of the train, my baggage fell, like because certain train stations, like when you get off the train, there's like these bump things, like they're very divoted, maybe like half an inch or something like that. And my suitcase wheels got stuck in the bumps when I was coming off the train, and all my stuff fell. It didn't fall out of my bag or anything, but two of my suitcases fell, and like no joke, like 30 people were like already on it. Like my suitcase was up before I could like do it myself, and yeah, it was just super nice. And so the train stations and the bus transportation, all of that is insanely good. Although I've been on the train for Washington, D.C. I've been on the train for New York City. I've done the Tri-Rail. I've done some stuff in Miami. Mexico City, you know how I feel about that. New York City, I think, is pretty decent, but aging infrastructure, especially after Hurricane Sandy, it's definitely affected their efficiency for certain tunnels. And I think that they are going to make some corrections with the Gateway program, which is like a $20 billion infrastructure investment program to connect the Northeast Corridor, which is a pretty interesting project if you guys look into it. I quite liked it. And then Miami is Miami, like it's not that good. And then the Tri-Rail is decent enough, but it's definitely not something on the scale of Mexico City or Japan, obviously, because it's just a linear train station with just stations along one axis. So the train station's good. The public transportation is excellent. The people are really nice, friendly. One thing that was kind of a culture shock, and I said everyone is super respectful and all of that. And I think that you hear these kind of things when you're talking to, like, from a USA citizen or maybe a citizen of Europe or United States of America or something like that. You might hear that like the Japanese people are maybe less expressive, but I think it depends on the social environment. So on the train station, everyone keeps themselves super respectful. Like no one makes any sound. Like you're in the train station and no joke, there's like thousands of people there and it's not very loud. Like I could say something and people would hear me. Like I could just talk normal and people would be able to hear me. It's not very loud. It's very quiet and peaceful. The loudest things are the trains, obviously, but you're not really hearing people talk to other people. You're just, and if they are talking to each other, like they're whispering, so you can't really hear them, and they're just being super respectful. But I did play pickup soccer and pickup volleyball for, 6.5 hours or something like that, 7 hours. And from my experience, the people are very expressive in their, emotions and stuff like that. So I don't know. I can't really say now, but I do think that stereotype probably doesn't live up to expectation. People really like to share their food and culture from these last couple of days. Like everyone is super helpful, like trying to get me to eat some food or try new things and like give suggestions. I've had some insanely good like food in the last couple of days. Some of the best food I've ever had for them, and especially best food I've ever had for the money. 100%. The language barrier is quite tough because when I lived in Mexico City for a month, I was able to read the language and I kind of know where I'm at. And in Japan, I can't read Japanese like at all. And I don't know any Japanese. In Mexico City, I knew like Spanish up to like maybe like a 7-year-old or something like that. So I could ask for things, I could do things or ask for advice or whatever. But in Japan, I got nothing. So I have complete reliance on Google Translate. And sometimes, since Tokyo is a melting pot of Asian countries and just people in general, not just Asian countries, but everywhere across the world. But for the most part, like if you go to a shop, they'll know Japanese, but there's sometimes like maybe you're at a not a Thai restaurant, but the people you're talking to are from Thailand. They don't know Japanese or somewhere else. And so then there's like a language, like a massive language barrier because I don't know Japanese and they don't know Japanese. I don't know their language. They don't know English. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult for those situations. That's happened to me a couple of times. And I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Sorry. The food, I think the food customs are pretty straightforward. I think, typically you eat with chopsticks and would, I would say when you're drinking the soup and the noodles and stuff, like you make sound like when you're doing it. Like you're supposed to like slurp up the noodles. Like in the US, you're not really supposed to do that. Like people find that rude. Like if you took your spoon and you slurped up the spoon, you know, like people are gonna be like, oh, that's annoying. But in Japan, like you're supposed to do that, or I don't know if it's seen as not respectful because I am American and obviously I don't look Japanese. So they might not see it as disrespectful. They just might see like, oh, you don't know, so whatever. But I do know that like that's part of the culture is like you're supposed to do that. And so when I'm eating the soup, I try to like slurp up the noodles. It's quite hard sometimes because the noodles are like sometimes heavy and thick. I'm like, I feel like I'm a vacuum sometimes. Is quite hard on some of them. But I'm getting used to it because you got to chopstick it, and then you kind of have like a long noodle, like a whole bunch of long noodles, and then you just like suck them all up, and then you obviously consume them and swallow them. But yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing I've seen, and obviously you don't put your same thing in the U.S. is you don't put your elbows on the table. Oh, for one thing that I did find interesting is you don't put your jacket on your chair or anything like that or at the table. Like there's a special jacket spot that you put your jacket. And that might be true in the US for like higher end restaurants and stuff where you have a place where you put your jacket and then you come back and you get your jacket. In Japan, pretty much every place that you go to, like just a hole in the wall or nice restaurant, they have a spot for your jacket that you have to put your jacket on. Like it's not acceptable to just have your jacket out and about. And then the next thing is if you come in with a bag in a restaurant, they'll make you put it in a basket. I don't know why, but that's just like the culture. And I would like to ask, but it's difficult because I don't know Japanese, and I'll ask at pickup soccer. Some of the people at pickup soccer know English, so I'll ask them. But for the most part, the basket thing was quite intriguing because I had my bag in there, and they were like, "Yeah, you need to like put it in the basket," and I was like, "Okay." And you put it in the basket right next to you. So maybe it's like so it doesn't slip or so you don't forget it, or I'm not sure. Another thing is like when you're handing stuff to people, you want to hand it to them with two hands. So if you're receiving stuff, so if you're handing someone your credit card, you need to pull it out, two hands, hand it to them, and if you're getting it back, you hold it with two hands. If you don't do that, I don't think they're going to be upset with you because obviously you're not Japanese, so they're like, oh, you don't know, but like that's what you're supposed to do that, and they teach you that like in business school, like with cards and stuff, like you get it with two hands, but that's how you receive and get the receipts and cards. Like when you're giving a card or receiving a card from someone, like a credit card, you do those things. Another cool thing I thought was a lot of the places they have a lot of these shops that make all this food, and at the end of the night they will discount everything. So I was part of like a discounting hunt, like a BOGO hunt, or like a discount crowd or something like that. I don't know what to call it, but it was like 11:30 at night at this store, like a grocery store. And there was like a crowd of like 15 people, and I was like, oh, they might be doing something. And for the most part, what I'm doing is I'm just like walking around the city, just doing things like taking the train places. And then I kind of just people follow. Like if there's a lot of people going somewhere, I'll just follow the crowd and see what's up. Like they must be trying to do something interesting if they're all going one place. So this crowd I followed and I observed. And yeah, so they were waiting for the person to put out the discount on these items. And then the item was given the discount. And once the item was completed, like with the discount, they would decide if they wanted it or not. and they would just wait. And once the people found an item that was discounted, then they would go and pick it up, obviously. But it was quite a few of us, and so we all waited. I thought it was pretty funny and cool at the same time. And I think that there's a culture in Japan for like food to be really fresh. And so I think if they don't have it like that day, they won't eat it. Like if it's not made that day, then it's not good, especially with seafood and stuff like that. Like a lot of places they'll like kill the food at a nicer restaurant. They'll kill the food like sometimes in front of you to make sure like, okay, it's fresh, or they'll bring out something for you to look and like, okay, this is the fish I want, and like that's the fish you get. But I thought that was pretty cool. They also have like receipts and stuff for your convenience stores, and a lot of people don't keep the receipts because you got to think about it. I said earlier, there's not trash cans about, so on the public streets, like they're not trash cans spread around. Like you're only really getting trash thrown away if like you're at a restaurant or somewhere like that. And so the receipts typically, from my experience and my observations, especially at a convenience store, aren't kept. And so there's a special spot where the receipt, like on your side, the receipt, you go in and the receipt comes out, and then you take it off, and then you drop it in like this receipt bin, like right underneath the receipt receiver or printer. And it's like a little plastic receipt bin that you put your receipt in. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I think there was one more thing that I wanted to bring up that I thought was interesting, but oh yeah. So when you go to a grocery store, or if you go to some of the convenience stores, if I think they're really busy, they'll have it, but typically no. But definitely a grocery store, they have it. You buy your items, like you get your items, and then you go to the register, and then they inspect your items, right? And then they ring them up, but you don't pay there. I think this is incredibly efficient, by the way. So you don't pay there; you pay at like a pay kiosk. So you ring up your items, and then they say, okay, like you pay over here, and so you walk over to this kiosk, and then you pay, and then you leave. Instead, like in the U.S., they have people ringing up the items, and then you pay while the person's ringing up the items, but while you're paying, the people behind you can't get their items rung up. So in Japan's way of doing things, you're ringing up your items. As soon as your items are rung up, you're good to go. They send you to another kiosk. And so while you're paying, that 45, 50 seconds while you're paying, they're ringing up someone else. It's the only time that they're waiting and not ringing up anyone is when all the kiosks are filled. I thought that was quite the how do I say? Quite the experience. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like this is so much more efficient than the way that we do things in the US. Okay, so I am going to talk about things that I think would make things easier. And so in the US, you have your internet service, your phone service, whatever. In Tokyo, same thing. But there is some popularity of these things called Wi-Fi pucks, and you can get a Wi-Fi puck. You could rent a Wi-Fi puck for a bit, and you could do like a week, 2 weeks, whatever. But the issue with that is it's quite expensive. Like it's like $16 a day or something like that from the ones I looked at. So there might be ones that are cheaper. I looked at the airport and then at like a different place, like outside the airport, and it was like $16 a day, which is really expensive when you put that in perspective, because you could eat a really good meal. Like that's a really good meal. I feel like for $16 is a good meal. So you're basically spending a good meal per day on that, because you could eat lunch for like $3, $2, depending on what you're eating. And then if you want to have a nice dinner, you could spend like $16 on your food. So there's the Wi-Fi puck, and then there's this other alternative called an eSIM. And an eSIM is how it sounds. It's a electronic SIM card. And so you don't need, and I'm looking away from my computer because I'm kind of pulling up the app I have. Okay, so you don't need a SIM, and then you don't need a new number. So typically you would get a SIM card, and that SIM card would have a new number attached to it. And then that new number is attached to that SIM card. So you put in that SIM card, your other number doesn't work. And you have to switch back and forth. And if you lose the other SIM card, then you're going to be in trouble. And there's just a whole bunch of issues. So I am using a eSIM company called Airlado. I think I'm saying that. Airlo. Oh my gosh. Okay, Airlo. So I'm using Airlo as the eSIM provider. I think there's another one that starts with a U, UBO, something like that. And then there's this other one that starts with Sally. It's an S and starts with Sally. And so Sally's from NordVPN, and I like NordVPN because NordVPN is pretty good and super seamless and great overall, high speeds, reasonable price. It's more expensive than the other providers, but it provides a lot more. So I like NordVPN, and I'm using it not right now, but I use it pretty often, especially when I want to I want to video stream, like, okay, I want to watch a show on Netflix or something like that, because Netflix is different in Japan than it is in the US, and it's definitely different in Mexico City. And you'll get different things, like you wouldn't be able to do certain things on websites you're trying to shop on. Like if you wanted to shop on a certain website, they might be region locked, and so you can't see certain items or see the website at all. So VPN is super easy to just put together for yourself. And it makes it easier to navigate the world when you're outside of the world that you live in. So I use Arlo. Oh my gosh. I promise you I did a lot of research. I just, the name. Arilo. So I did research on Arilo, the UBM product, and the Sally product. And Sally is the NordVPN product. And Sally is a product that is, I guess, decent, but I think it has issues with their customer service. Their app isn't that good. Their speeds are lower than UBG and RBO. Oh my gosh, I keep messing up this name. UBG and Arleto and UBG are like the best ones, and Sally's pretty new. It's part of NordVPN. They just launched it not too long ago. UBG and Arleo are been on the market for a bit, and you can get a lot more things with those products, and they're faster, and they allow for country roaming versus only staying in one country. Sally, the product is assigned by country, and so it doesn't allow country roaming, which is important if you're in Europe or if you're traveling to different places. You'll have to pay again for a new SIM. So every country you travel to, it's a new SIM. With UBG and Arilo, they allow for country roaming, and that's what you would want if you potentially would be traveling. If not, you could use Sally. I've been saying Sally. Sally. You can use Sally, if you want to stay in one country. Sally is more expensive than UBG and Arlo. So keep that in mind. If you really like NordVPN products, then use that. If you don't, use the other providers. They are better and they allow more options and more flexibility on things you can do. They're a little bit more seamless in the integration. And that's why I selected the vendor that I selected. For me, Sally was off of the list. And so then I have an eSIM. So I set that up. I purchased 10 gigs. And then the next thing I did is I got a VPN. And so I got a VPN, and I just re-enabled my VPN with NordVPN. And NordVPN is decent. There's another one that's cheaper. I just suggest NordVPN because NordVPN has got a long history of being very secure. It is a little bit more expensive than other people, I would say. But with that expense, it comes with, a long track record of performing the services and also rendering those services with high level of privacy. I'm not really that concerned about the privacy thing, but there's a big emphasis like on these other ones that have some like shady backing where really, is it really a VPN or is it really like a spying service? I don't know. NordVPN is definitely a good provider, I would say. So if you want one, I would use NordVPN from my research. And so those are the two things I've set up for myself to make my life a little bit easier. And we'll leave it at that. And so what my plans are to do is I'm going to live in Tokyo for another like week and a half. And I won't say anything about my experience. And then I'm going to do another episode about my first impressions, like first couple of days of Korea, and see how my impression of Tokyo and Korea have changed over the last couple of weeks that I've been here. So I'm going to do a reflection episode. This is more like an intro. Hey, I'm in Tokyo, Japan. This is how I'm feeling about it right now. I think the city is amazing. It's super cool. It's very clean. The people are very generous. Awesome. Fun place to be. It's mentally stimulating, overwhelming at times. Sometimes when I came home, I would just take a cold shower, close my eyes, and just let my mind rest, because there's so much stuff going on. You can do anything at any hour, pretty much. Your options are unlimited, really, of things that you can do and when you can do it. There's constantly events going on. Like you could do anything that you want, and so you have to really figure out what you want to do, because you might have decision paralysis. Okay, well, of course, if you listened in today, you know what happens next. So have a good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in this world. I appreciate you listening to this episode, and hope that you listen in next week. Next week, I wanted to discuss either the Reflection 70 billion parameter model, or I wanted to talk about my review-ish or / opinions on Insta360 and GoPro. And so those are the two topics that I might talk about, and hopefully you find them interesting. So I'll talk to you next week. Bye.